One of the themes that we've touched upon a lot already is the role that culture plays in shaping our behavior. So when I talked about social role theory, one of the things that I emphasized is that our behaviors are determined very much by what kind of roles we play. And of course, our culture is shaped by our roles. When I was talking about intelligence, I guess it was 2 weeks ago now, one of the things that we emphasized is that intelligence and problem solving and certain cognitive abilities are shaped by our particular culture. And that's actually been one of the themes throughout the semester, the key role that culture plays in human behavior. Now, culture refers to a number of things, what kinds of information we know, how we speak, what are our values and norms, what traditions do we have. And so if we look even within this country, I think it's easy to see that maybe people who are living in inner city Baltimore would have a very different culture than those in rural Nebraska. They're going to place priority on different things. They're going to know different types of information and have different types of traditions. And so even though they might have the same language, they still have a slightly different culture, and that's going to impact their behavior. Now, one of the big concepts in culture would be values. I think we're all familiar with this word. It's the sorts of things that we deem as being desirable and the right way to behave. Along those same lines, we also talk about norms, which would be the rules and the guidelines that dictate our behavior. Now, as humans, one of the key things for us is to conform to norms, to conform to the way that other people are behaving. And even though a lot of times we talk about conformity as being a bad thing, conformity is really key for our survival. But conformity is going to lead to different types of behaviors depending upon what culture you're in. So conforming in inner city Baltimore is going to lead to one pattern of behavior. Conforming in Alliance, Nebraska leads to a very different pattern of behavior. So you get that. Now, to illustrate this, and in particular what I want to focus on is maybe some different norms in Eastern cultures, like Asian culture, versus Western culture, like that we have in the U.S., is I want you to think about how you would respond to a friend who wants to have his or her child sleeping in bed with them and their spouse. Maybe at 5 years of age, the child is still sleeping in bed with them. Now, a lot of times when I ask students how they feel about that, they, in general, are pretty uncomfortable with it. They see sleeping in bed with a child as being something that creates maybe some blurry lines between child and parent, or is going to foster dependence. And a lot of times in the U.S., what we really prioritize is independence. So a lot of people say, well, I want my child to sleep in a separate room so that he or she grows to become more independent. So I want to contrast that very American approach to what we see with people who are living in India. All right, so now I've followed a link, and this is a little blog website called indusladies.com, and it's, I guess, a chat room for women who are Indian, particularly women who are Indian and living in the U.S., at least that's what this particular blog is about. So we see a post made in 2006 by this woman who has a 5-year-old boy, and she's struggling with whether or not she should, as she puts it, make her child sleep separately in a room. And so she's kind of contrasting the Indian tradition of bed sharing with the American tradition of being separate. And so if we look at some of the responses that she's gotten, this woman here says Asians are different in bringing up their kids. And as you will notice, the bondage is more. So what she's referring to there would be the bond between parent and child. So she makes the point that it's better to have the kids with you until they feel suffocated, maybe around 6 or 7. So she argues that this is necessary for the children to feel secure, and that most children in America, I'm assuming she means non-Indian children in America, find it difficult to bond with their parents. And so what we're seeing is that the Indian women are really taking a priority on that level of bondage, close relationship, and interdependence between parents and kids. And if we look down here, we have another woman who's responding, who says that Americans, who really can't blame them for having the children to sleep separately. That's just their culture. children are made to sleep, basically saying that they're forced to sleep in their own rooms at a very young age, and that limits the bond that they have with their parents. The Indian way is bringing up a baby is very different from that of the American way, and so you'll find kids sleeping with the parents, and that this leads to a closer relationship and greater bondage, which again is bonding. So just from this blog post, obviously we can't read too much into one single blog post, but I think it's a nice demonstration of the differences between an American approach, which really emphasizes independence, and the Indian approach, which really emphasizes close bonding and interdependence. And that's actually exists even as the children grow up. The married daughter would go and live with her son's parents, and a child is expected to take in elderly parents. That's just part of the culture. So that little difference that I was trying to demonstrate is representative of a greater difference between two general types of cultures. So the culture that we as Americans are familiar with would be a more individualist culture, where independence from friends and from family, is something that's really valued. So often as we are growing up, we talk about finding our own unique strengths and our own unique gifts, and that's really what we value as Americans. So the relationships that people in individualist cultures tend to have are often more temporary. Confrontation is acceptable, sometimes encouraged. One of the things that we want our kids to do is to stand up to one another, maybe to stand up against us even as parents once they get a little bit older, because we really want them to develop their own identity. But I think it can be a tendency in this country to just assume that that's how everybody is, that everybody in all cultures is very individualist, and that that's the right way to be. However, there's a sizable part of the human population, not sure if it would be a majority or kind of a 50-50 split, but there are a number of people who are collectivist in culture. And so the collectivist would be the more Eastern cultures, Asian cultures, some Latino cultures. And if you think back to that drawing that I showed to you in the problem-solving lecture, think about the drawing of the kid in Hong Kong and how that drawing showed a whole bunch of small stick people, because an individual's identity was not so important, but the social network, that family that they had, that was important. Contrast that with the drawing that the American children tend to do, where you have one person way up front, where it's really that unique identity that's important. So in collectivist cultures, the goal is to really emphasize your dependence on your family, your friends, your community. The goal is to fit in, not to find your uniqueness, but to fit in, blend in. So a big goal is to accommodate other people's expectations, to fulfill your social duty. You may not have as many friendships and relationships, but they are very, very deep and very strong. And what really matters is to maintain those group relationships. So we can see that there are definitely differences between individualist and collectivist cultures. The individualist culture is all about unique identity. The collectivist culture is all about maintaining community and family connections. And we can kind of demonstrate that if we look at some personal ads. So I realize personal ads aren't really put out all that much anymore, but this is something taken from about 10 years ago of a personal ad that's pretty typical of the way an individualist might approach dating, where you have one person seeking one other person, and of course you're highlighting your unique attributes, seeking these unique attributes in your partner. Now when I contrast that with somebody from a collectivist culture, in particular India, now this is a California newspaper, but it's specifically designed for Indian readers. And in these personal ads, what we see is that it's not an individual seeking a mate, but parents seeking a mate for their child. And what the parents have listed is their regional locality and also their particular status in that regional locality. And so they're saying that they want a daughter not just a daughter who has certain characteristics, but a daughter from a respectable family. Because in a collectivist culture, it's those family ties or community ties that are so important. We see that again down here in this ad. Again, a particular location, a particular status, and it's the family who's looking for a girl who's well-cultured, meaning, among other things, that she really understands and appreciates her Indian culture. So even looking at these personal ads, we can see some very big differences between collectivist approach, specifically Indian, and a more individualist approach. One of the things that researchers have been interested in is how people in these two cultures might differ. And so a question I pose to you is, in which culture would you expect a greater degree of happiness? Or maybe a different question would be, in which culture would you expect that individual happiness is really prioritized? And probably just in the way that I've put that, you can appreciate that in an individualist culture, one's own happiness is really prioritized. And it turns out that people do report slightly higher levels of happiness in an individualist culture. Because you don't have to sacrifice your own wants and needs in order to satisfy other people. And so there are some slight differences. On the flip side, we do see that a higher crime rate exists in individualist cultures. And this makes sense. If I'm from an individualist culture and I really place a high priority on my own wants and needs, my approach is going to be, screw you, I'm taking that money, or I'm going to shoplift, or I'm going to hurt you because that satisfies my wants, my needs. Whereas in a culture where conformity and fitting in and getting along and maintaining social ties, when those things are really prioritized, you have a lower crime rate because people want to get along. So I'll pose the last question for you just to kind of think about. And I think on that note, I'll go ahead and end. If you do have any questions about this material, certainly the textbook goes into much greater detail than I have here. And although I am away on Friday and Saturday, I am around and have plenty of time to meet with people if anyone has any particular questions before getting involved with the quiz. The quiz is, you'll have an hour and a half to do it. There's 24 multiple choice questions and one short answer question. They're all on the same form. But please contact me if you have questions before you start it. That's all, folks. I'll see you next week.